Hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation on Themistocles. This is my submission for the September 19th homework deadline for the Ancient Greek and Rome video submission section. And today we get to talk about a famous Greek Athenian politician named Themistocles. He was famed as a politician, as a general, and a strategist in a military and warfare context. Now, some of his most credible and most significant accomplishments had to do with the Navy. Greek society at large had come to appreciate and idealize the hoplite warfare strategies of the Spartans, with their large shields and their spears and the phalanx warfare formation. Their society had not yet tended towards the Athenian appreciation of naval activity. This wouldn't become a thing until Themistocles built this appreciation into Athenian culture. Now, there are three historians who talk about Themistocles' early life. Two of them give him praise, and one of them adds more of a critique. Growing up, the historians of Herodotus and Thucydides praise him for his intelligence, his quick wit, his affinity for speech, and yet on the flip side, the historian Plutarch notes his wisdom and his quick wit, but then he also makes comment about the danger of the hubris that Themistocles tended to have. He was a talented leader, but he was incredibly thirsty for power and wealth. We don't know a whole lot about the early days of Themistocles' life, but what we do know is that he was not born into an aristocratic family. Therefore, it's kind of unorthodox that he grew to be such a political figure. As far as we know, his mother was a foreigner, and thus he was kind of seen as a societal bastard. His family wasn't wealthy by any means. They were middle class through and through, and thus his rise to power and his growth and his ability to speak orally, project towards crowds, and draw an appreciation for himself from others was a really significant thing. He was charismatic, he drew crowds, and it helped him in his rise of political power. Plutarch, the historian who famously kind of critiqued Themistocles, was noted in an interaction that has grown quite famous, even referenced in the movie Lawrence of Arabia.
I cannot fiddle, but I can make a great state from a little city.
What?
Themistocles, sir, a Greek philosopher.
I know you've been well educated, Lawrence.
Themistocles, when he was mocked, people made fun of him for his lack of education. He would essentially say, well, I wasn't classically trained. I may not know how to play the instruments that you do. I didn't get the schooling that you do, but I managed to raise an insignificant city into greatness. Now, Themistocles, if we take a look into the future, was famously credited with moving the location of Athens port to a more fortifiable location. This fortified port that Themistocles would come to build would be known as Piraeus, and it is one of the most famous ports in all of Greece. So why is it that Themistocles put such an emphasis on the development of Athens' navy? Well, in order to know this, we need to take a step a little bit over into Asia Minor and look at what was going on with the Persians. Now, over in Asia Minor, on the coast, we have a collection of Greek city-states, the Ionians, and those Ionians were kind of subject to Lydia. The leader of Lydia was a man named Croesus, who was incredibly wealthy, but overall he treated the Ionians pretty fairly. Now, Croesus wanted to stunt the expansion of the incredibly rapidly growing nation of Persia, and they were coming up into the Asia Minor region, and they defeated Lydia after Croesus engaged them in battle. Now, as Persia worked its way up through Asia Minor, what this meant is that they had access to all of the coastline, and through this, all the Ionian Greek city-states. And so they began to develop an incredibly strong fleet along this area. Now, down in Attica, Themistocles is just growing into political prowess and power as development of tension with Asia Minor and with Persia is growing. When there eventually is an Ionian revolt, the Athenians aid some of their forces to the battle along the coastline in Asia Minor. The new king of Persia was Darius, and Darius holds a grudge against Athens and the other Greek city-states that assisted in the revolt of the Ionian cities along the coast. Because of this grudge, he sends ambassadors of Persia over to some of the Greek city-states, to Athens, to Sparta, and they demand resources, water, and essentially they ask for submission. Now famously, Sparta and Athens totally reject this demand. The Spartans kick the ambassadors into a well, as featured in Zack Snyder's movie 300.
Madness. This is Sparta!
And the Athenians put them in some sort of pit that was supposed to be for executions. After King Darius of Persia's requests are not met, they begin to invade into the maritime areas of the Greek city-states. A Persian fleet lands up to the north of Athens. A small group of Spartans come over and they assist at the Battle of Marathon. Now the reason that a small group of Spartans comes is because they had a religious festival that was going on at the time and they wouldn't send all of their soldiers. Later on in the story, in the Second Persian War, we're going to see a religious festival of the same nature play a significant role. At the Battle of Marathon, there is a very much larger Persian force, but the Greeks are spread much wider in order to defend the flanks. And at the middle of the Greek phalanx, which is the expression for the hoplite formation, where they have the shields and the spears, and they hold tightly to each other, covering one to their left and to their right with the large shields. At the center of this formation are two political leaders and generals in Athens at this time, Themistocles and his eventual political rival, Aristides. The Greeks do hold off the much larger Persian force, and it's a massacre. The big victory at the Battle of Marathon has a large psychological impact on the Greeks. For Persia, this is just another battle that they lost. They have a large empire and a lot of people to keep up with. However, for the Greeks, the success at the Battle of Marathon meant that there was a reorientation of Athens at the center of Greco society. They were valued for their navy, their intelligence, their art, their high culture, their politics. And all of these were essentially wrapped up in what Themistocles was doing. As I had mentioned before, the naval general was building this incredibly large sea force. Even while Athens grew in power, Themistocles still feared Persian invasion. He knew that the consequences of their victory would be an eventual return. 10 years after the first invasion, King Xerxes sends over 300,000 men up through Asia Minor and into some of the higher Greek city-states. Because of the fear of invasion, a lot of Greek city-states come together with an assembly led by the Spartans. And the reason was because Spartan was still the most revered for its military strategy and their warfare. And they essentially start to plan for the impending Persian invasion. As Xerxes' forces are pushing up through the north, all the northern cities are giving up easily. Now remember how I had previously mentioned a religious festival going on in Sparta during the first invasion? Well, at the same point, there's another religious festival going on in Sparta, and so Sparta will not commit men to assist the battle up in the north. However, Themistocles pleads in a great oral speech delivered to the Spartans, asking for reinforcements. And so, despite the religious festival, King Leonidas leads 300 men to the aid of the Athenians. As the Persians are coming down, the Greeks go up and meet them at Thermopylae. King Leonidas famously leads this Spartan force at a topographically narrow location, while nearby, Themistocles leads the Athenian navy at a sea battle. Now during this sea battle, there was incredibly tumultuous weather, and the ocean destroyed a great deal of the Persian ships. Themistocles and his navy were fine. However, despite their resilience and heroics, King Leonidas and the Spartans are destroyed at the Battle of Thermopylae. Seeing that Xerxes' forces are no longer stopped on land and are heading straight for Attica, Themistocles makes one of the most bold decisions in military history. In the career-defining moment of his military and political life, he decides that they are going to abandon Athens. The reason was, the best shot that the Athenians had at defeating the Persians was engaging them in naval combat. Using his intelligence, Themistocles plays a game of psychological trickery with King Xerxes in order to engage them at the Battle of Salamis. He sends a message to King Xerxes essentially saying, the Greeks are in panic, they're fearful, they don't know what to do, they're divided, and so if you respond ASAP and invade, we will actually defect and help you with the invasion. King Xerxes of Persia takes the bait and invades immediately. Themistocles told the Persians exactly where to attack if they wanted to have an advantage, but the truth was, he'd set a trap. Similarly to the Battle of Thermopylae, he had chosen a location with a bottleneck, thus taking away the advantage of the incredibly sizable Persian force. They used this bottleneck as an opportunity to engage only a smaller percentage of the Persian force at one time. With the wind at their back, the Greeks were able to ram into the Persian ships and create destruction. With Xerxes watching from nearby, the Persians were defeated handily by the Greeks. Shortly after this battle, their influence in the Aegean Sea and Asia Minor began to deteriorate. At this point in Greek society, Themistocles was a rock star. His strategic and political success was unlike many other men. But, as the historian Plutarch had mentioned, some of his dangerous character flaws would now come to the forefront. There were a few factors that started the resentment of Themistocles in the Greek world. One of them was his distrust of the Spartans. Another one was his affinity for wealth and money and riches. Another one would be his obsession with his own self-image. Similarly to the Greek hero of Achilles, he fell in love with his own legend. Athenian society had a policy that if any one politician or any one man got too powerful, they could vote to banish this person, usually for 10 years, but with extenuating circumstances, longer periods of time. Now, previously in his career, Themistocles had gotten his political rival Aristides banished. Now this would come back to bite him because as the resentment grew towards Themistocles, he himself was banished. Being ostracized from Greek society meant that he would seek refuge in nearby Greek city-states. However, eventually, he would flee to the Persians and speak to King Artaxerxes. A great deal of time had passed since the First and Second Persian War, and King Artaxerxes had grown to have an appreciation for Themistocles, both an appreciation for his wit, his intelligence, but also his militaristic and political abilities. Because of the respect that he showed for him, King Artaxerxes gave him governance over the Greek city-states in the Asia Minor area. Eventually, he would die at the age of 65. Now, there's some debate about his death. Some historians say that he died of natural causes, and others say that he was potentially committing suicide because Artaxerxes asked him to go to war against his own Athenians, and he couldn't handle it. We won't ever know for sure, but what we do know is that the hubris of Themistocles would come back to bite him in his later age because he was so ostracized from Athenian society, which he helped build from the ground up. The important things to take away from Themistocles' life is his intelligence, his political prowess, and his ability to strategize well as a general. His involvement in the Persian War was instrumental to the Greek success and the growth of Athenian society. However, in the end, it was the content of his character that would be his undoing. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you staying for this submission for the biography assignment for this Greek section of the class, and I'll see you guys later.